Information fueled.
Opinion driven.
This is Nashville's Morning News with Dan Mandis.
And so, my fellow Americans,
we talk news.
Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk, Beta 97 WTN. Good morning to you, friends. How are you? Welcome on in to your Monday, May 19th of 2025. Matthew Hurtt is joining us on the Newsmaker Hotline. Matthew, our grassroots political analyst. Always great to have you on. So there's just, Matthew, as you can imagine, there's just so much this morning. So let's get right to it. First of all, Joe Biden's prostate cancer diagnosis. Our Daily Dan poll, watch us on YouTube, take the poll, like and subscribe and all that. But the poll is, do you agree with Donald Trump Jr. that this is yet another aspect of a cover-up regarding Joe Biden's health? And for folks that are just joining us, we did break this down in the 5 o'clock hour, but you got a lot of people and a lot of doctors basically saying that there's absolutely no way that in just a short amount of time that this prostate cancer has metastasized into Joe Biden's bones. There's no way that this is something that was just diagnosed, that this is part of a broader cover-up regarding Joe Biden's health. So a lot of conservatives and doctors are saying that. What say you?
Yeah, Dan, I'm in the same boat here. Now, I'm not a doctor. I'm not an attorney. I don't play one on the radio. But some of the things that I've read overnight and this morning seem to indicate that a diagnosis like this and its progression would take 3 to 5 years. So this is very serious, and that puts us at the beginning of the Biden administration. Now, RNC Research, the opposition research arm of the Republican National Committee, tweeted in July of 2022 because Joe Biden gave a speech, and he indicated it was a slip of the tongue or a slip of the teleprompter, indicated that he had cancer, and a number, including the Washington Post fact checker in chief, said that the RNC was out of line for calling out this slip of the tongue.
Well, and Matthew, if I may, I've got that piece of audio. Let me just play it so people know what you're talking about. I did play it in the 5, but this is back in, I believe it was 2022, Biden speaking about the environmental issues in Delaware when he was growing up.
And because it was a 4-lane highway that was accessible, my mother drove us, and rather than us be able to walk. And guess what? The first frost, you know what was happening. You had to put on your windshield wipers to get literally the oil slick off the window. That's why I and so damn many other people I grew up have cancer. And why can't, for the longest time, Delaware had the highest cancer rate in the nation.
And you know, it is interesting, Matthew, because you talk about the RNC. All of us on the conservative side of the aisle who pointed out, this is not a gaffe. I mean, that's just bizarre. And we were called, all the usual names like conspiracy theorists.
And now we see all of the books and the articles, and even the New York Times is saying, what did Biden's advisors know, and when did they know it? And people like a lot of the reporters that you see are releasing these books now. And this diagnosis is certainly, now this is me stepping back and putting on my cynical DC hat, will boost the sales of these books for sure. But it's convenient for the pundits on the left who defended Joe Biden for years to be in this position now, and it is downright reckless. And this is the thing. A cancer diagnosis like this is serious, and I think that we should take a pause for anyone in public service who receives a diagnosis like this. But for Joe Biden's closest advisors, including his wife, to put him through not only most of the first term, but a campaign for the second term. And then again, the cynical DC hat says, well, let's say they knew and they wanted to make Kamala Harris the president by default so that the Democrats could say, we elected, or we put out the first woman president. So that there's a little bit of that in the background where I'm like, oh, if they knew midway through the first term, was this the plan all along? And that's downright disgusting to consider that Joe Biden's advisors and handlers would put him through that.
Well, and you've got folks that are out there saying, and it's so predictable, Matthew Hurtt. You got people saying, well, you shouldn't really talk about this because it's Joe Biden's health, and all of the talk of the cover-up needs to basically stop for now because we're, supporting the former president. And this cover-up is not about Joe Biden. I mean, it is, but it's not. It is about Jill Biden. It is about the people that were surrounding him. It was, and it is about people like, his entire family and the entire Democrat Party. Earlier, Matthew, I said from AOC to Jasmine Crockett on the younger side, all the way up to Chuck Schumer, none of these people can be trusted. This entire generation of Democrats cannot be trusted because they stood by while America knew exactly what was going on, and they said that we were nothing but conspiracy theorists.
It is Orwellian. It is almost exactly like 1984 in the sense that you can turn on CNN, you can turn on MSNBC, you can open the Washington Post or the New York Times, and what they are printing, what they are saying, is false. Is not true, and you read it and you consume it and you say, what universe, what timeline, what planet are these people on to lie to the American people to their faces? And I don't even know, do they believe it? Or are they back in the green room saying, hey, we're about to go live and what we're about to say is ridiculous? I have no idea. But the American people have to look at this and say, what on earth has the mainstream media been doing for the last particularly 5 years, but way further back than that, to change the narrative and change the reality, to sort of will the reality into existence, what they believe in the green room and on TV at CNN and MSNBC.
Well, we also, of course, and I played the audio earlier, you can find the entire 5-minute piece on my X feed at Dan Mandis Show, but the Robert Hurtt audio came out on Friday, which seemingly has taken a back seat to this whole prostate cancer diagnosis. But the reality is that audio is also just an extension of the cover-up that we've been talking about. Have you listened to the audio? I played some of it, but have you listened to the audio, and what do you think?
I've listened to a good chunk of it. I know over the weekend that Heritage Action, the Heritage Foundation's sort of political arm, filed court paperwork to release the full audio, to force the release of the full audio. It is very concerning. Again, these are, and Joe Biden doesn't go into, or he didn't go into these interviews, even depositions and legal conversations, without someone else who knows about him in the room. And so again, imagine you're a staffer and you're sitting there and you see the mental decline, the collapse of somebody like this, and you come out and you say, oh, everything is perfectly okay. You then go to the American people and say, trust that this president is in control, is running the country. It's just two different realities, two stark realities, one that they're trying to paint a picture of, and then what is actually going on. A president in mental decline, which, as you said a moment ago, Dan, conservatives and others who question authority were calling out years ago.
All right, speaking of two different realities, I want to play you this piece of audio.
Well, all I'm telling you is there's a growing number of us who, we don't like smoke and mirrors, we want real cuts. That's what we agreed to.
We are writing checks we cannot cash, and our children are going to pay the price. Something needs to change, or you're not going to get my support.
That is Ralph Norman and Chip Roy, and both congressmen and both incredibly fiscal conservatives, and they are battling Mike Johnson, who says everything's fine. So we'll talk about the big, beautiful bill as it continues to be negotiated. Matthew Hurtt is our guest, our grassroots political analyst. More discussion straight ahead, 6:15, time to check the roads on WTN. Very much as far as your weather goes, we've got today, high of 81, scattered thunderstorms on Tuesday. Strong storms as well. We are at a 3 out of 5 on the severity scale. Appreciate you listening to Nashville's Morning News on WTN and that 3 out of 5 again for Tuesday. All right, so Matthew, this was Mike Johnson. This is what he said earlier this week. This was either Sunday night or early Monday morning.
Look, all 11 of our committees have wrapped up their work, and they spent less and saved more than even we projected initially. This really is once-in-a-generation opportunity that we have here.
So, I don't know what to say about the big, beautiful bill, but you've got these fiscal conservatives that are up in arms. Mike Johnson says that he is confident it is going to pass the House. And I don't know, where do you think this whole thing is going to end? I guess it got out of committee. Apparently this morning. They're hoping for a full floor vote later on this week.
So it got out of committee yesterday. So actually, members of Congress were in town yesterday to vote. I think the vote was 17-16, and 4 Republicans voted present, which means they were in the room. They didn't record a yes, they didn't record a no, and so their vote did not impact the vote tally. 17-16, all Democrats voted against it. The Republicans can only afford to lose 4 votes on the House floor with the number. There are 2 vacancies in the House, 220 Republicans, 214 Democrats. So this becomes a math game for the Speaker. If those same 4 Republicans vote present and not no, that is good news for the Speaker. If they vote no, then the vote fails by 1. And so we see this in Nashville all the time. Your listeners will see this, and we see it in Washington, where a member of a legislative body, if they don't want to vote and put their vote up on the board, they will vote present, or they'll walk out of the chamber conveniently during the vote, so that their vote is not recorded. And that ultimately doesn't impact the number of votes it takes to get to passage of a bill. So if those same 4 Republicans who voted present yesterday vote present on the House floor, this should get out of the House, but there's still some question. I certainly believe there's horse trading and conversations going on behind the scenes about this bill.
Well, as far as the palace process and the palace intrigue, it's going to go over to the Senate, and then they're going to do what they're going to do. Then it goes into reconciliation. I could swear this thing was already in reconciliation. I got to tell you that the process at times can be mind-numbing and stupefying, because on one day it's like, oh yeah, they've gone into reconciliation. Then you find out the House is still working on their side of the bill.
Yeah, and this is something that I think your listeners should tune into and key up a little bit. A lot of members of Congress, a lot of politicians will say, oh, I voted for this, or I opposed it. And you really have to dig into what votes were cast and when. On a certain bill, you're going to have at least 3 votes, plus votes in committee and amendments. And so this is something where it makes it very easy for politicians to say they did the right thing, but maybe they did the right thing on vote number 2, but when the vote came up in vote number 5 for passage, they did the wrong thing. And I think that is something that your listeners should be on the lookout for. It is not something a lot of people have time to do. These are arcane rules in legislative bodies, and it's hard to follow sometimes, but it is certainly something we have to be on the lookout for.
So the Democrats are saying the Republicans want to cut Medicaid. Republicans are saying, well, no, we're not cutting Medicaid. What we're doing is cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. How do you know which one it is? I mean, I only trust the Republicans as far as I can throw them, but I do understand there is a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid and in the government, generally speaking. I'm going to have Tim Burchett on here a little bit later on at 7:06 to talk about this. But so that's the accusation. Republicans want to gut Medicaid, and they want to increase the debt by $5 trillion. Goes on and on, but Scott Bessent will come in, and then Scott Bessent will say, yeah, but we're bringing trillions of investment into the economy. Somehow Mike Johnson will say we're actually cutting spending. You see how mind-numbing this gets.
Well, and Tim is such a great explainer, and so I hope your listeners stay tuned through the 7 o'clock hour. But this is something where, let's say, there is certainly waste, fraud, and abuse in any and all government programs, just like there's waste, fraud, and abuse in any program. Yep. And a Republican could vote. Let's say it's $100 million, and $2 million of it is waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, they're technically still cutting spending to Medicaid. And so an opponent, a Democrat, could say that. And again, this is the political speak where they could go on TV and say, Congressman Dan Mandis voted to cut Medicaid. Well, you may have voted to cut the waste, fraud, and abuse. He's telling the truth, right. But it is a different kind of truth. This is, again, the wild side of political messaging. So it is something that, again, your listeners have to be on the lookout for. And I think Congressman Burchett is a great explainer. It's great that you have him coming up.
Well, I got to tell you, he's out there and he's calling out Congress, and he's saying that he is now going to file legislation to start codifying Donald Trump's executive orders. And in his, little video, he said that he's tired of Congress not doing their job, and doggone it, he's going to do it. What do you think the reaction is going to be?
This is exactly, you and I have talked about similar topics over the last several months. The DOGE cuts, the executive orders, as soon as Donald Trump is out of the White House. Let's say, Kamala Harris is elected in 2028, heaven forbid. She could go in and undo all of the executive orders that Donald Trump did. So the good ones need to be codified, and I think that Congressman Burchett is in the right place. The question is, do enough Republicans agree with him? And we've already seen Republicans in the Senate and some Republicans in the House who refuse to pass bills that codify DOGE cuts. So that's the question. Are Republicans going to go along with it? It's a great idea, but in practice, where the sausage is made, it's uncertain.
Yeah, and what do you think is going to happen in the Senate? Do you think once it gets out of the House, it's going to pass the Senate? They, of course, have their own ideas of what they want to do.
Well, there's 24 or 25 Republicans who voted against the DOGE cuts, and they all have, every senator wants to be president, even if he or she is not running in the next cycle. And so they all have their own messaging points and their own projects in their own states. And so that is the question. I would say if you look at a Republican senator in a state where that Republican is going to get reelected over and over, he or she feels pretty insulated from accountability by the voters.
All right, Matthew Hurtt, how can people find you on X?
I'm on X at Matthew Hurtt, MattheWHurtt. All
right, always great perspective and analysis, and we'll talk to you again probably at some point this week with all this going on, and it is 6:23 on Nashville's Morning News. By the way, do not forget, I'm looking forward to this. Dr. Manny Sethi from Vanderbilt, he's going to help us break down Biden's prostate cancer. That and a whole lot more straight ahead. Joan Jones has the news at 6:30. Joan.
Dan, the search continues for some of the inmates who escaped a Louisiana prison on Thursday night. Also, we'll take a look at the suspect in the bombing of a fertility clinic in California. Those stories and more at 6:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTF.